Cha-cha-cha.
You're tuned to Tropic Wave Radio, being simulcast by Against the Grain, and the views expressed on the broadcast of both stations are not endorsed by the staff or management and are the views and opinions of the host, guest, or callers. Let's welcome your host tonight on the Vicki Travis Hour, Vicki Travis.
And good evening, Peter. How are you this evening?
Fine, thank you, Vicki. How are you doing out there?
Just fine. That was very interesting music.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to tonight's broadcast from something you wrote, but I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag.
No, don't. But I don't think there's any hocus pocus or Satanism involved in this one, even though not in this. No. No. Not
somebody else, huh?
Must have been, but this is California. This is about California.
Okay, so it's going to be a nice and clean.
Well, you determine what is the definition of clean.
All right, we'll sit back and listen.
All righty, good
It's
evening.
all yours.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Vicki Travis, and tonight's program this January, what is this, January 4th, 2005, is in memory of all victims of managed care. Now, the views expressed on this broadcast are not endorsed by TWR, its staff, or management, and are the opinions of the host, the guests, or the callers. The listener call-in information is toll-free USA line during the program 1-888-762-8153, extension 897. And then when you're prompted for the conference access code, please press 897 with the pound sign. Outside the United States, call 1-641-497-7320, and again, the access code is 897 pound. Now, the program this evening is going to be painful for the guest to tell. It's being done so that you can all learn from it, so you hopefully will be able to prevent this from happening in your family. There is never any closure with any medical murder that is ignored by the authorities. What really happened to Mr. Burt Kennedy? This is a case where a paid companion drugged her employer, railroaded him into a hospice on her word alone with no medical credentials behind her and no one verifying the patient's health. The patient was poisoned. The paid companion inherited the bulk of the estate and divided the proceeds with the police chief in Southern California that was a trustee of the estate. Medicare was defrauded. It's my understanding Medicare was defrauded with this. The man certainly wasn't dying of anything except for being poisoned. The doctor involved blindly followed the paid companion's instructions and enabled the murder of a great American hero, and a man that provided to us, the public, some of the best motion pictures and television programs in history. The proof is absolute. There are witnesses, and there is medical documentation. The cops do not care and refuse to even investigate the case. Today, the movie, memorabilia, museum pieces, the contents, the gun collection, all of Mr. Kennedy's prized possessions, which he collected over the years with his work, in particular with Mr. John Wayne, now illegally reside in the office of David Snowden, Chief of Police for Costa Mesa, California, where he brags about this publicly. Numerous interviews where he brags that these are his possessions and they are not. Nancy Pendleton, a paid companion of well-to-do elderly gentlemen that mysteriously die from non-existent terminal illnesses and real estate agent in Newport Beach, California, has sold off the property, had it bulldozed over, and kept the bulk of the proceeds. Now here tonight, as told by the daughter of Mr. Burt Kennedy, Susan Kennedy McNutt, is his story. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Vicki.
How are you this evening?
I'm well, and yourself?
Oh, just fine. Just fine. Now, your family has suffered a horrible loss, and I know that what you learned had taken place before your father's death only made it worse. Can you tell us about your dad and what happened to him?
Well, back in September of 2000, I'm sorry, he had gone in and had an angiogram that showed that he needed to have bypass surgery. He had been, suffering with what he thought was a hernia, making him short of breath, and as it turned out, he had his arteries were blocked,
Right.
and he needed to have this surgery. And the morning that he was to have the surgery, which was September, he called and said that they had called the surgery off, and because something was wrong with his levels in his kidneys, and they thought that perhaps it was because of the dye medium from the angiogram.
All right.
And from that day at the end of September until the following February, not many months at all, my dad went from needing triple bypass surgery to being dead, and at the hands of his caretaker. And
How about little Chickie?
pardon me,
Little Chickie.
little Chickie.
Little Chickie. I can't call her a caretaker. I'm sorry.
Well,
or caregiver.
She was a personal assistant.
Personal assistant.
Everyone in Hollywood has one.
Yes.
She came about 9 years prior to care for my dad after I had to go home. I had 4 young children, and he had.
You're out of state.
Yes.
Right.
I was living back east at the time, and he had prostate cancer surgery. And somehow this girl had pushed her way into coming to care for him for just a short period of time after this surgery.
And they became good friends, supposedly.
Well, I don't know. She just never left. And she went from the caregiver to the assistant. And
These are actual titles she had.
yes.
Okay.
And then she was his assistant. And then when hospice was brought in 6 weeks prior to his death, she was again the caretaker. That was her title.
At that point, your father, I understand, was expressing concern for his well-being under her care, too, wasn't he?
Well, at about 3 weeks into the hospice experience,
Right.
He changed his mind. But at that point...
now, the hospice was based on a non-existent disease.
Correct.
Yeah.
He was diagnosed, according to the hospice papers that I received through the Freedom of Information Act.
They wouldn't give them to you at all.
No.
Which is a violation of the law, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I finally did get them, and the diagnosis for admission to hospice was terminal lung cancer.
Right, and that was based upon Nancy Pendleton's telling, which doctor was it? Dr. Albert Katz, Ronald Carlsberg, or who was the third one? Franklin Strauss, all of Cedars-Sinai?
Strauss was the renal doctor, and the bottom line was Strauss was the one who made the terminal diagnosis.
All right.
Well beknown to Katz, Albert Katz, who was his primary care physician, who, by the way, became his primary care physician because of the insistence of Nancy Pendleton.
Yeah, this was a good friend that nobody's ever heard of?
Right.
Yeah.
This was my father's personal friend.
That no one ever had known a thing about?
No.
Yeah.
Except that he was a friend of Nancy Pendleton.
Right. Did Nancy hang out with, who's that other star that was accused of killing his wife that's on trial right now? Did she hang out with, what's her name?
Oh, Blake?
Blake, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know who.
Just sounds like a similar pattern to me.
Well,
Yeah.
the only problem was my father was left unable
Yeah.
after prostate surgery. So
Who knows? Well, yeah, but she looked good on his side.
I guess so.
Yeah. I mean, it's
She's my age, so.
well, yeah, but that's for your dad. That's not robbing the cradle, but it's someone that looks appropriate for his status. How's that?
Right.
Is that a nice way of putting it?
That is nice.
Yes. Your dad was a nice guy, and I don't think that he did anything wrong. I certainly don't think that this herbal tea thing that she started pushing on him, that so many people were concerned about, should have happened. And, it left him in fear. Whatever it was, it seems to me that it altered his thinking. It made him vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I can recall a time when we didn't know where Dad was, and I probably spoke to him a couple times a week on the phone. My sister the same, and she was there in Los Angeles, so she spent time on the weekends with him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, she lived on the other side of the hill. She was a single mom and a school teacher, so it was difficult for her to.
Yeah, but you guys thought that he was okay.
Right. But we discovered at one point when one of Nancy's friends was in town, she answered my dad's office phone, and she said, "Do not tell Nancy Pendleton I am telling you this." And that's when we found out that he was in the hospital and that he was not in good shape at all. I mean, if you knew my father, who got a haircut every Saturday, his fingernails were 2 or 3. I mean, it was a Howard Hughes type thing. His hair was long, his fingernails were long, and what her MO was she would threaten to, when he was sick and in the hospital, she would leave the dogs, and which were like his children, and he was absolutely under her thumb because he couldn't drive. He was absolutely had no control of the situation. So she used that as a tactic to get the upper hand in managing his care. And when he started suffering from this gastrointestinal problems of unknown origin,
right,
that's when the tea thing came up.
Right, and now Dr. Phillips went over those records. It was poison, wasn't it? And the doctor should have picked it up himself.
The two things that were never done was he never had any kind of tests for drugs or alcohol or anything like that.
Right.
When he was from the medical records that I was able to obtain. And then at autopsy, they did not run any toxicology.
There was one test, though, I do recall, from the medical records, because I remember discussing it with you and Dr. Phillips, where he had been poisoned, and it was right there. It said poison in them, and they should have picked it up right then and there.
Well, I think they should have picked up that the man needed bypass surgery.
Oh, yeah. Well, how old was he, so people will understand what age group we're talking
76.
about? He was 76, okay. So this is not somebody in his 50s or anything like that, yeah.
No. But,
and he was getting towards that frail age for a lot of gentlemen.
But he never was real. But you have to understand, he wasn't a real physically active guy, never was. But he certainly wasn't not able to do for himself. I mean, when he first got a divorce from his second wife, he cooked and he had a housekeeper that came in. I mean, he took charge.
Right.
It wasn't until the vertigo started happening in the gastrointestinal, which I am we are convinced was caused by some kind of poison.
Right, and you had several people express concern about that tea didn't
yeah.
you? And what did you learn about that? Where it came from or anything?
What we don't know. We don't know. We know that it. The only thing that I have seen in recent months has been the pictures of the Ukrainian, I don't know, prime minister or
president
or whatever, when he was poisoned by a substance that apparently is found in everything in very small amounts and will show up in very small amounts, I guess, in everybody's blood. But his ruddy complexion and the way that his face looked, my father had that same look sometimes.
At one point you guys were blocked from seeing your dad, or it was made extremely difficult to communicate with him, and he was kind of isolated from everyone. What happened with that? Near the end,
yes,
he was expressing plain fear of the woman.
Yes, and then everything changed when she basically went out of town and didn't feed the dogs and didn't come. He had him put in the hospital and didn't come to the hospital, and that's when the fear. That's when he was very, very fearful.
I don't think most people, younger people, understand that when a parent has their children, their family grows up and moves away, they don't want to be a burden on them, nor do they want to be under their care. They want to remain independent. So when they have these pets, that's their life.
Oh, and my father was over the top. I mean,
and
he would give money to every stray animal on the street. That was his. Animals were his life.
Right,
and the dogs.
So that's a very vulnerable part of a senior. It's a good way to hurt them. It's like saying, I won't feed your own kids.
Right. Exactly. And so she used that, and then he was totally dependent upon her, and then she cut him off from. At that point, he had no access to a telephone or cell phone, and when I would call the hospital when he had been admitted over and over and over, the nurses would tell me that she had taken his cell phone away from him, and that they didn't know why he was there, because there didn't appear to be anything really wrong with him. That perhaps he had depression, or they had no idea why he kept returning to the hospital.
But these are doctors that would do anything as long as they got paid, right?
Well, apparently.
Yeah, just
because
like
I don't see anything in the medical records that would make us jump from a guy having gastrointestinal problems and vertigo, who's in need of a bypass, to terminal lung cancer that had metastasized to the lymph nodes.
There's a lot that doesn't make sense with this, how she got away with it. But then, when you think there's been several celebrities with doctors from that area that are given prescriptions for anything because they want it, and no other reason, maybe these guys, maybe Nancy just called up and says, I want him in the hospital. And what did she do while he was gone?
I know one time she left town because my sister went to found him in the hospital. And that's when she found him in such a horrible state with the long fingernails and they had him on kidney dialysis, although he was still able to urinate, and
it was just not medically necessary.
Everything was, I know Dr. Phillips said that just reviewing his 10 years or 9 years of medical records with Albert Katz, that he hadn't even gotten the least amount of care that should have been given for a plethora of things that plague people as they get older, high blood pressure, diabetes, I mean, nothing was checked, nothing was ever diagnosed, and nothing was ever treated.
Yeah, I checked on these doctors today with the medical board. Nothing. No action at all has been taken against them for anything. I think they're just by doc people.
Well, I tried to bring a medical or a wrongful death suit against all three of the doctors, and I went as far as I could possibly go on a kind of per basis. And the bottom line is, in California, because of the cap on how much you can sue for, and that the only monies that you can get on top of that would be loss of wages and things of that nature. Because my dad was retired, you just can't find an attorney.
Well, it costs a lot. Yeah, it costs a lot of money for them to
look
sue.
At a case
Yeah.
like that. And then when I was every one of those doctors had, a whole slew of lawyers. And in California, it's not like it is when you hit somebody in your car and you go, well, it wasn't my fault, and they they say, we don't care, we're just going to pay it. That's not the way it works in medicine. A doctor can say, I want to fight this, and they have to give them a lawyer.
The neighbors, friends, people contacted you and said, there's a problem here, didn't they?
Yes.
And there was legally nothing you could do.
No.
Because by then she had gained control over him.
Well, not only had she gained control over him at the time, I did not know it at the time, but she had also gained control over his bank accounts and the estate. And
this is one thing that concerns me. I always thought attorneys were supposed to verify that this was really the right thing for their client.
But the attorney was Nancy Pendleton's boyfriend.
All right, and that's who?
Marvin Jubis.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if he still practices. He again is an older gentleman.
Oh, well, gee, that's her style.
But he's the one who, on November 9th, he changed his will and his trust, making Nancy Pendleton and David Snowden, who was at the time the chief of police of Costa Mesa, California.
He's still there, isn't he?
No.
He left?
Well, he has moved on up,
How could you do that? He's already at the top in Orange County.
Well, he's now the police chief of Beverly Hills.
Oh, that's scary. That is a real shame. You mean the guy that his little henchman bashed in? I remember that dentist in particular. They just made a boo-boo, crippled him for life. I think he was being taught a lesson while he was sitting on the beach with his family. So, in fact, I think the detective that you had found that case, his abuse of victims, and so he's over in Beverly Hills to push people around now.
Well, he retired, and I know that someone who is very involved in watching what goes on in Orange County,
yes,
that his name was kicked around to run for sheriff, and then all of a sudden he is now taking the position of chief of police of Beverly Hills, which is perfect. I mean, it's the perfect ending for him. He wanted to be a movie star. And
yeah, but he's going to stand up to the wrong people, and they'll hurt him there.
I don't know.
He's just a wannabe Southern California surfer boy that wants to have a badge, and that's the way it is. I mean, I don't think he'd know how to be a cop if he tried.
I don't know. He has good press. I know that.
He has very good press. That's his background. He has the connections. What a shame. So I stand corrected with the promo I put out that he's the sheriff of Costa Mesa. He's now...
Well, he was the police chief of Costa Mesa.
Yeah, pardon me, police chief, but he is now with Beverly Hills, and may they do what they want to him. It's not like there's big crime going on there like in the rest of the city. He's dealing with a different type of people, and they will hurt him. He still has your dad's stuff, doesn't he?
Yes, and I know that basically my dad wanted Nancy to have enough of the belongings from the house to start, her own home.
Right.
But then the rest he left to David Snowden, and I know that was just to protect those things for us girls and for the 5 grandchildren. However, David Snowden, although he was given the gun collection as a actual part of the trust, it was an actual subsection, he decided to take it upon himself to take everything else. He and Nancy took everything. So even the pictures of our children, the pictures of our grandchildren, even the memorabilia. My dad wore a hat all the time that finally retired to his mantle.
Yeah.
And we buried him in a baseball cap from one of his movies. I think it was Big Bad John or something.
Uh-huh.
And because that hat was to come to me, and it still hasn't made it. So they, even the things that they knew had been bequeathed are still in his possession.
They sent you and your sister a very nasty letter saying that you were just very greedy children that only showed up to collect the check and then you'd take off again.
Oh, that wasn't Davidson.
That was Nancy. Nancy, yeah, but I mean, she was speaking for both of them there. Wasn't she?
Well,
July 12th, 2002.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a pretty common behavioral trait, or not trait, but a thing that people do that are guilty of something. They try and pass it off on, pat you on the head and make you feel stupid, which is all that she tried to do. I'm pretty sure that after you got over your few moments of being really hurt, that she would even imply something like that.
Well, I
fueled the anger.
I know that my dad and I several years ago had a tiff, a pretty big one, a real father-daughter, and I wrote him a letter, and and that I forget what it was even about, but at the time it was goodbye and I'll never speak to you again, one of those very dramatic.
Yeah, we have them with our kids every other week, don't we?
Right, and
yeah.
I know that when I hired a lawyer to try to represent Bridget and I in the probate case, that when David Snowden first met the attorney, that he gave that attorney that letter, and that was proof that everything that Nancy had said about our relationship was true, that,
This one letter was supposed to be proof of everything. But did anybody bother to look into Nancy's background, her track record of bumping off old men?
Nope.
Or her current track record of shacking up and bumping off old men, too?
Well, I don't know if she's where she is now, but I know that she was working for a very eccentric old gentleman in Newport Beach in real estate for a while, and then she left there, so I'm hoping that he was spared.
Right.
I do not know what became of that, but I don't know what she's doing now. We did get all the way up to depositions in the wrongful death case, and I know she made a big scene and would not come to the deposition because she feared for her life, because she thought that I was going to kill her.
Right.
So,
and then didn't she fake a serious illness for a while, too?
Well, she said that she had a lung removed. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, yeah, she could still, get around, though, right?
as far as I know.
It just seems like everyone else that has that done can.
But I didn't realize how bad it was until I received the hospice report.
On your dad, you're talking about? Yeah.
I mean, my dad and I have, we spoke a couple, 3 times a week on the phone. We were very close.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like you were alienated from each other.
No, and what's really, I mean, we didn't, after we had this fight, we didn't talk for a while, but then I got sick. I had a heart attack, and my dad was right there for me, and we remained as close as we could be, 3,000 miles away. We very much had a telephone relationship, which is not unusual. He had the same kind of relationship with his mother until she died. It was just the way he was. However, in the hospice notes at intake, when they asked all the questions, which were supposed to be answered by the patient, they were all answered by the caregiver, and they put me down as Susan, not knowing what my last name was, not knowing where I lived, and she said that I was alcoholic and drug addict, and I had been abusive to I mean, it was just, I was shocked.
No, we've run across several cases like this where people are jerks like that, and they just write it down. Nobody checks anything,
Well, they totally took him in without even observing him. I mean, not only was the diagnosis not correct, and that he did die of a drug overdose.
Yeah.
Morphine and whatever other drugs they give for pain in the hospice situation.
Mm-hmm.
That, that's what took his life.
And were you guys allowed to visit him at the very end? Were the neighbors allowed?
My sister was there, only because she kind of pushed her way in. My father did call me on the phone in the middle of one night and said he changed his mind. He didn't want to die. Come and help him. And in the background, Nancy and this nurse who was from the dialysis place, who was there, I guess, as a night nurse, was saying, tell him to let go, tell him to let go, tell him it's okay, he can die, and he was begging for help. So I did get on a plane with my kids to go down there.
Yeah.
And however, Nancy didn't arrange for us to get a car. We had no, she arranged for us to stay in a hotel that was on the other side of the hill, away from him, basically. Well,
for people that don't know, on the other side of the hill means like an hour in traffic.
Maybe if there's no traffic.
Yeah, it's a real hill, but there's bumper to bumper, very slow traffic.
So she had a baby monitor up there, so she could monitor everything that was being said to him.
Oh man!
The entire time. So even when his ex-wife came to say goodbye, I know my sister turned the baby monitor off, and she just went crazy. So it was, but we were kept from him from the time from let's say Christmas onward. He had been in the hospital several times. He had had bouts of vertigo. He was on some blood dialysis we didn't even know about. And then at Christmas, someone asked him in front of my sister, what exactly is it that's wrong with you, Burt? And he said, oh, I have cancer. So that was the 25th of December, and by the 5th of January, he was already admitted to hospice.
Yeah. Now, you guys ended up calling the police, and you did try and get in there and see your dad, and what did she do to block you guys? How did she block you?
Well, I came at one point with my daughter.
Right.
And just showed up.
Uh-huh.
And she made me wait at the gate for, I don't know, almost an hour. She wouldn't let us in. And
you couldn't have called the police and say, hey, this is my family's house?
My father was he would have been mortified.
How dare you call the cops, right? Make a public scene.
He would have been mortified
Yeah.
if I had gotten, because at that point he was saying, I'm very happy with the caregiver, and he was talking not about Nancy, but about this nurse from the dialysis center.
Right.
But when I finally got in and was visiting with him, the nurse said things like, your father's a Catholic. Like,
yeah,
I didn't know that. So I am sure, I wish I
Was that supposed to be good or bad?
No, she was what I'm saying is that she thought that we had just showed up out of nowhere, at the end of this guy's life. I'm sure this is the story that Nancy
yeah, okay, I got you. All right, so I think, yeah, a number of people can identify with that. And you're out of the picture, so they can say anything they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so, okay, but you were allowed to see him. And if you had created a scene at the gate, so that would have, but still on the other hand, if you had known how serious it was, you would have gone ahead and called the police, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You wouldn't have played this polite thing.
I knew, in retrospect, if I had it, this is very painful to say that if I had anything to do over again, I would have done, I would have just thrown everything to the wind and said, and gone and gotten the appropriate help. However, I did not realize that there was help out there for situations like this until after.
What would you recommend for people or advise people to do? The neighbors call you up, prominent people call you up and say, hey, there's a problem here, you better get down here. And, you're the kid, like, what are you supposed to do? You're still doing this respect thing with your parents.
Right.
And it's, how dare you, you couldn't talk back, you can't go against what they say, and people play off of that.
If I had it to do again, I would have, my cousin, who is a doctor, who helped me to understand what was going on with him medically and why the whole hospice thing had all of a sudden he's in hospice.
Right.
And he said, after talking to my dad, that Bridget and I, my sister, would have had to have just put our entire lives on hold and taken over from that very second.
That's true. You would have had to give up everything, drop everything, and go and take care of your dad.
And it was that whole thought was,
it's scary.
So frightening, because what if we,
what if you break your dad?
Well,
that goes through your mind. What if you break dad?
But the only regret I have in my life is that I didn't do that.
Yeah. See, it was your fear. It was your own. For anyone, it's their own fear that holds them back, and of doing the wrong thing. Believe me, we all have that fear. Susan, you're not the only one. Yeah. Well, how would you suggest that someone, I guess, heed the word when it comes to you? Pay attention. Don't think that they're just being busybodies or something.
Oh, I just think I think that you have to put aside yourself,
right,
and absolutely do what you know in your heart and in your gut that's right, even though there could be a lot to lose, because what I lost was my dad.
Yeah. And your children lost their grandpa.
Oh yeah. And then to have to fight for, it'll be 4 years in February, to fight for every scrap,
Yeah.
that was left for us. I've done it till I had no means to do it anymore.
Yeah.
For me to have to pay, I do have closure in a sense of, at least I know what happened, how he died, why he died, and what mistakes that I made. And I just wish that there were places like the Hospice Patients Alliance out there, so everybody who was facing a family member going into hospice would know that there is support out there.
Did Medicare ever investigate this?
No. No.
Did they give you a reason why? Or was it the, CMRI or Lemaitre? They passed it off on everything was perfectly all right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think everything's perfectly all right to them. Probably 9/11 was perfectly all right to them, too.
Well,
You know, that was probably a normal event. The way they handle things that are, right in their face.
well, that's the government.
Yeah, well, it's a disappointment.
Well, the whole thing has been a disappointment. I mean, for the police officers to say, oh, yes, there's never a statute of limitations, but because you didn't call us before he died, there's nothing we can do for you afterwards.
See, I don't understand that. Do we have a caller? Hello?
Hello, Vicki. It's Dr. Carly calling.
Hi, Dr. Carly.
Hi, how are you? I'm sorry, but I couldn't resist.
All right.
Because as it turns out, tomorrow night on my program on Highway to Health at 10 o'clock, I'm going to be discussing the most egregious case of murder by medicine that I've ever seen in my life. So I just want to let your guest know that there are some doctors that do know what's going on. What you're dealing here is What you're dealing with here are medical masons, the anti-Hippocratics, the ones that are willing to cover up what's going on. Because you're totally correct, they should realize that there's a problem here, that what was happening to your father did not make any sense medically.
Well, they didn't care.
Pardon me?
They didn't care. They just wanted their paycheck.
Let me explain to you why they didn't care. It's not because of their paycheck. It's because the police sergeant chief, whatever title he may hold, was obviously a Mason as well. The judge in charge of the probate was also a Mason, and Masons protect Masons. So this was a done deal. And this woman would have never done what she did had she not known that she was going to get protection down the line, because obviously she should have been charged with elder abuse and murder.
Yes.
This is the way it works. And if the listeners listen to my show tomorrow night, I will describe how they're actually killing the elderly people in the nursing homes, because there's no money left in the Medicare Trust Fund, so they have to get rid of these people. And they do it by putting them in the hospital and doing their various techniques. So I don't want to take up any more time on the show, but you just have to realize this is the way it is. Right. And I'm sure your relative, the doctor, even if he realizes this, if he, opened up to you and told you what he knows to be going on, he would have a problem as well, because they come after doctors that expose these things.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Carly.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Susan, did the elder abuse, was that brought up?
I brought it up.
You brought it up, and
I brought it up. First of all, there isn't a real attorney that practices elder abuse in the whole of the United States, because there ain't no money in it. would be willing to go out on a limb when there's no money behind it. So really, elder abuse, unless it's something that you can prove right then and there,
right,
that it's happening.
Yeah.
Maybe you could get the police to be involved, but to go through a legal proceeding that, you know, where all these laws have been put into place to protect elders, you know, it just doesn't happen.
I didn't know that.
It just doesn't happen. It's because the research is usually not done until after the fact.
I mean, I've been kind of, you know, in Los Angeles County, the Elder Abuse Task Force is well-meaning, but I've seldom heard of anyone actually being assisted by them. Perhaps they need a little more training, is a nice way of putting it. I don't know what the penalties are criminally. With elder abuse, the case of Dennis King, you know, the man that killed my father, that is part of what he's in court for, under, you know, but then that's a civil matter too. But that did go to the Supreme Court, so I know that they are doing that, but I don't know how productive it's going to be for the family in the end. They did tell me that this is perhaps part of what goes on, why the police are reluctant, which doesn't morally sound right to me, but the attorneys in this particular case, knowing full well that there's more than enough to convict him, prefer to go civilly, because that way the family will be able to obtain the funding from the suit that they need.
Right.
And,
well, it all comes,
you know, I mean, that's so dirty.
It all comes down to whether or not the DA will even look at it, and look at my case. I mean,
well, your case is, I would think
it's a
yours
convoluted with the police chiefs and the,
yeah,
you know, I mean, they just don't, you know, I mean, there's that code, and I'm you know, these
are not real police chiefs for anyone listening. This is not the land of the high crime. Anything real that happens there, they call in somebody that knows what they're doing. You know, I mean, that's the nicest way to put it, isn't it, Susan?
Well, you know, I would think that in Costa Mesa, the biggest crime would be
Rodman.
BMW speeding.
Yeah.
You know, and probably the same thing in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
You know, but there's, I don't know, there's a code between these people. You know, lawyers made money off of this. They abused the whole system. And you know that his estate is still open.
Yeah, that's what I thought it had to be finalized within so many months, and here it is 4 years.
No, the laws apply to everybody else but me.
Really?
That's the way you feel.
Well, what are they trying to do? Use up everything until it falls apart?
Well, there is nothing else. The only person who has anything of any worth is David Snowden, who has my father's personal possessions that would be very nice to hand down to his grandchildren. But he even told me one time before my father died that Nancy was out in his office burning the papers at the insistence of his lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, everybody had a lawyer but us.
Yeah.
You know.
I remember it was pretty hard for you for a long time.
That was very hard. And I'll tell you, if it hadn't been for you and the patient hospice.
Oh, Ron Panzer did a lot.
Ron and all
Dr. Phillips, Harvey.
And Harvey.
Oh, God,
if it hadn't been for that group of people, I would never have gotten any closure. From them helping me to obtain the autopsy report, to interpreting it, to looking at the medical records, and I had very, very limited funding because, all the money that was supposed to be left to my sister and myself and the grandchildren was just sucked up by these people, I mean, here is an estate that they spent more money than there was money to spend.
She had a pretty high lifestyle, it sounds like, because, I mean, here she inherited this stuff before. I mean, I can at least save money, or invest it, but she seems to have gone through a lot of stuff pretty fast.
Well, she's a drug addict.
Oh, that's right, yeah, she was on coca, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Cocaine, yeah. And is Snowden, by the way, for anyone listening that might be in Beverly Hills, I'd like to know what their police chief is like. Does he have a drug problem?
I have no idea. I know he has a problem telling the truth.
I know he's a bully.
And he's a bully, but he will tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you he is a man of integrity. He is a bully, that police mentality. He actually would tell us what was our need to know. Here we were, the grieving children.
Right.
And what was our need to know. And that's the way he approached it. He was running the show. He made all the decisions, and he and Nancy lived high and mighty and took it all. And when things turned against him, he just used the money in the estate to buy the best lawyers he could, and gave it to another incompetent person, the new trustee, who's had it for another 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's still not closed. And there's nothing. All she has to do is write the letters of closure, but she hasn't. She's just too busy to do that. So.
Just too busy. It's okay to break the law in the state of California, isn't it? They must be privileged enough. No one else can do it if you bring it to the court's attention.
They're all above the law. The law doesn't apply to them. So it's been a very eye-opening and very, very hard road.
Yeah.
And as I said before, if it had not been for the Hospice Patients Alliance, Ron and Harvey and those folks, I would not have gotten as far as I did in my trying to pursue a wrongful death suit.
Would you recommend it for anyone to try and go that far?
Not if it was a young person or a breadwinner. Yes, absolutely, because they have worth. Old people have no worth. And all the
yeah, except for their property and their bank accounts.
Well, I'm saying.
I know what the court says. They have no value. I know.
No, the court, according to the lawyers out there, it's, I mean, the only honest lawyers were the ones that said, look, if the estate isn't worth over a couple of $1 million, then it's not even worth it for me to get involved.
Yeah.
And when it came down to the wrongful death, it had very little, for me, it had nothing to do with the money. It just was, I wanted some justice. I wanted...
Now, Snowden got your production company, your dad's production company also, didn't he?
Well, he closed it.
He closed it?
Yeah.
And just, kept everything for himself?
Oh, absolutely.
What a sweetheart. And what's he going to do with it?
I don't know. I guess pass it on to his son as his legacy. I don't know.
I wonder if his son will bump him off. We learn from our children, don't we? Or our children learn from us, rather. The other way. Yeah, we learn from our kids, too. We learn what they do, but...
Right. But the only thing is, I know that it says, revenge is mine, saith the Lord, and that's the only thing, my faith is the only thing that put me on the other side of this thing and allows me to even talk about it like we have tonight without,
No, you're handling it very well.
Being very, very upset.
Yeah. Nancy does have a track record over the last 20 years of doing this to other elderly gentlemen that mysteriously die, and she has inherited properties and other possessions, and she has gone through these valuables really fast. She is a real estate agent, and last we checked, as Susan said, she's not sure if she's still living at their 13138 Magnolia Boulevard in Sherman Oaks, California, area, zip code 91423. Licensed as a real estate agent with Farouk Tamriz, Tamiz, on Ventura Boulevard in Encino, California. I wouldn't suggest that anyone even deal with this woman, ever. I think that would be a very dangerous thing to do. I wouldn't want her to know what possessions you own. I wouldn't want her around any elderly person whatsoever or any weakened person. She is prey, or preying on people. She considers the weak just someone to latch on to and take advantage of. And she is losing her looks, but she is still someone that an older gentleman would be, she's what, 20, 30 years younger than, how old is she? She's late
51.
51, okay. So she's young enough where she would look good on someone's arm, but she's old enough where they're not robbing the cradle, so no one could really criticize them, but they would know her for what she is. Anyone looking on would see her for what she is. I don't think that's I don't think anyone listening would want to do business with her, and just because of her track record. She was in San Diego, California, doing this to gentlemen before she moved up to the Los Angeles area. She hurt a lot of people. It's not just the elderly victim that she has killed and steals the estate. It's a family, it's the grandchildren, it's the great-grandchildren. Everyone has a loss there, and then when they find out the truth, the pain that the entire family goes through is nothing in comparison to a normal death. Because a normal death, you can say, okay, they went on. But this is something that never closes, because it's not, you can't even compare it to an act of war. It's just like somebody thumbing their nose at you afterwards, and they're allowed to. It's condoned in this society, and this is inappropriate. Or can you add any more to that, Susan, in the next minute or two?
Well, I just think that if anyone is faced with a younger caregiver situation, they need to do background checks. They need to know where these people have come from. They need to know, I mean, everything that I learned about Nancy Pendleton was after the fact.
Right, and she was recommended by someone in the industry, wasn't she?
I don't know that for sure, but I would not be surprised.
Right.
And I know that she made many, many acquaintances through my father, which I'm sure she has kept up, because I know she kept his Rolodex. But knowing, what you're dealing with before you start dealing with, and making sure that when someone is recommended to hospice as being terminal, that you have everything in place to know that is indeed.
Take them to another doctor first.
Absolutely.
Right. And when somebody that's taken advantage of people and robbed you blind tries to put you down and say that you've got sour grapes, forget it. Just ignore them and go forward. Don't be offended by it. Ignore them and see them for what they are. Because, man, that is so classic what she did with that. That letter to you girls.
Well, she does. You see it on 2020. I've seen the story. It happens to other people. It doesn't happen to a well-known filmmaker and his family. And it's been happening. It happened, and it's been happening for 4 years, and it continues to happen.
Well, look at Blake.
Yeah. And but there are sociopaths in this world, and unfortunately, one came into our lives, and not coming against her, and not coming and putting her out of that house when we should have, when the neighbors warned us was a big mistake.
Right. Now we're going to wrap it up this evening. Susan, I'd like to say thank you very much for being on here on this program this evening. I hope that everyone listened carefully to what Susan Kennedy McNutt has conveyed to you. This was not easy for her to do this evening. Thank you again, Susan.
Thank you, Vic.
Alrighty. Now, in closing, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Next week, Lynn Osborne will tell us what she believes the public should be doing to be obtaining proper health care coverage. And stay tuned for other informative content at Tropic Wave Radio. Good night.